Troy Boisjoli, CEO of ATHA Energy Corp. We're a large uranium exploration and development company with the significant land position across Canada's best uranium jurisdictions, focused on our flagship Angilak project.
You are, but I think new news is that but be careful how we phrase this, the KU Discovery Target press release. Is it a discovery?
Yeah, hey, we discovered first hole, Matt. First hole along a 31-kilometer long trend across a basin with no drilling in it, and we hit mineralization in the first hole. So discovered mineralization, about 7 meters of composite mineralization downhole in the first hole along a trend, which has us really excited because not only about the mineralization, but this is a area that we've been building up since we acquired the project. This was part of the upside that we were looking at when we acquired Latitude Uranium for the Angilak project. So yeah, we're really, really pleased with the result. Excited about the result, and more than anything, kind of hats off to Cliff, our VPX, and our technical team for the execution on this.
Can you just talk to the specific lithologies or structures that host this uranium interval, and how's it related to what you've already discovered?
Yeah, why don't we back up and talk about the project and the different areas within the project. So Angilak project covers the Angikuni Basin. The Angikuni Basin is a sandstone basin, sub-basin of a broader basin system that included the Athabasca, the Thelon, etc. Okay, now historic resource at the deposit, 43 million pounds at 0.69%. That's the Lac 50 deposit. Lac 50 deposit sits right at the edge of this basin, outside of the edge of it. The trend that we're talking about today is the Rib 9 iron trend. So over the course of the last year, we did a bunch of generative geology, exploration work. We acquired new geophysics, did a bunch of structural geology work, some geochemistry overlay, developed some very high probability targets. And this is a first test from within that basin trend. The first time we've drilled a hole in the sandstone in the Angikuni Basin, and on the first hole with that first test had a result that we're really excited about 70 centimeters of what we'd consider off scale, above 10,000 counts per second within the radiometrics, up to a peak mineralization in the 24,000 kind of count range within the RS-120, or 19,000 counts on the probe. So yeah, it's exciting. And over and above the mineralization, from a geology perspective, this is a different type of setting, different type of system than we see at Lac 50. And that's, that has us excited.
Right. So it'd be better for people who are used to sort of seeing this in percentage terms. Can you just talk in terms of that radioactivity recorded? Can you talk about your kind of protocol for converting that CPS to, a percentage of U3O8?
Yeah. So, hey, you can do that, right? You can convert counts per second into equivalent grades. You want to do that with a high degree of confidence and clarity. And what that requires is site-specific or local-specific data sets. Okay, and so with this area, you're looking at counts per second in that range. We'd consider that high-grade mineralization. Okay, that's grades you can convert it over, plus in the percentages ranges. Okay, I won't get into specifics because what you really need is that the assay data back from this area that correlates back to radiometrics to be able to build up that in a robust way. But high degree of confidence that what we're seeing here in terms of the radiometric profile represents grades, in that percentage grade range.
Okay. So it gives you a good quick guide to where you drill next, possibly before the assays come back. You have a high degree of confidence, as you say. Can you just say, give us a few clues here? Can you sort of describe that kind of spatial relationship between the kind of gravity lows and fault intersection and this kind of mineralized interception? I know suppose hole number one probably a bit loaded, but what did you take away?
Well, the takeaways, a number of really compelling takeaways. Okay, so first hole into a trend that was built up based off geophysics, structural modeling, de-risked with ground geophysics, which is gravity and EM. First hole that we drilled 85 meters, hit mineralization. But from a mineralized control perspective, what is actually localizing this mineralization really, really compelling, because we've seen tens of meters of brittle faulting through the sandstone column, which is a really good indication. But beyond that, we intersected the unconformity. So that's the contact between the basin and the basement rocks. At that unconformity, there was a 23-meter wide graphitic fault zone, graphitic structure, very analogous to what we see in the Athabasca Basin. Large scale, brittle, graphitic fault, very highly encouraging. Moreover, then we saw about a 90-meter wedge or offset at that fault zone between of the unconformity. So upper unconformity, lower unconformity, fault ripping through the middle of it, offset, brittle structural offset on that structure. Again, another very interesting feature, very compelling part of the geology that we're seeing, and a radiometric profile around it. Okay, radiometric elevated radioactivity around that. Within the Athabasca Basin, where you see these graphitic structures and where you see significant offset of the unconformity cutting through the sandstone like that, those are very, very compelling exploration targets and expansion targets. The most prolific one of those that is well known, and people that are inside the uranium space in detail would understand that the P2 fault has about 90 meters of offset on it. The P2 fault hosts McArthur River. Okay, so this, if you're looking for, going through a deposit model index, call it like a technical index within a uranium deposit, you're looking for some key features. You're looking for brittle structure. You're looking for late disruption on those structures. You're looking for graphitic fault zones. And if you overlay offset at the unconformity on top of that, it builds up to be a very, very compelling area and a very compelling target. That's even without uranium mineralization. Now you overlay uranium mineralization on top of that, and hey, it's really we've got a 31-kilometer long trend with one drill hole into it, and that drill hole is mineralized.
So how do you get after this? Because you need economic drilling, right? You got to what's where are the best places we can drill? What type of drilling we do to kind of add to the end goal here is to build up a bigger resource than you've got this historic resource, but you want to build up a big resource here. So in terms of like chasing what you've, and again, hold on, I get it, but how do you get after that properly? I'm trying to understand the kind of shallow mineralized horizon. What are you looking at? Is it simple step out drilling, downhill geophysics? I mean, how do you get to the economic bit?
Sure. Well, why don't we? I think when we're talking about that, let's back it up to the project as a whole, because that's an important part of our strategy.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. One, the most advanced area within the Angilak deposit area, project area, is the LAC 50 area. Okay. 43 million pound historic resource, average grade of 0.69%. If I look at uranium deposits, what is it? Similar to Cameco's Eagle Point deposit, as an average grade of 0.7%. Okay. Last year, we stepped out materially from the footprint of that historic resource. 10,000 meters of drilling, 25 drill holes, intersected mineralization in 100% of them. Expanded the footprint materially from that, the mineralized footprint. And this year, the other hole that was in the release from the LAC 50 deposit area was a further expansion of that. Okay, so when you're talking about advancing the near-term stuff, it's about expanding the footprint of the LAC 50 deposit area. We feel that area in and of itself has a scale, and we're outlining the scale right now to then move that forward into delineation phase and advance the project based off of that small area alone, which is LAC 50. Now, this 9 iron rib trend, this is over and above that and represents kind of a step change or the opportunity for new discovery, new torque within the system. And so that's what we're seeing. And our objectives are twofold. Our objectives are find the edges at LAC 50, because we haven't found the edges yet, in order to be able to optimize more detailed drilling work moving forward. Okay. And then the second portion of that is we've got this trend now that we have identified, that we've de-risked, that we've hit mineralization on, and so the opportunity for discovery over and above that becomes very, very compelling. And the reason it becomes compelling is if you have the area around Lac 50, which has the scale that we believe it has, and then you overlay additional discoveries along a Athabasca analog trend. And what we're talking about is a regional scale opportunity. And Matt, I know you talk to enough guys that are sitting in chairs like mine that, when people talk about camp scale or district scale, it almost becomes cliche. And I get that completely. But with what we're seeing, Lac 50 proper, and then the trend is we want to unpick the regional scale opportunity and the value here.
Right. Okay. Right. You need the data to be able to kind of make those interpretations and reshape any kind of thoughts you have on how you get after that. But until you've kind of worked out where the edges of Lac 50 are, it's a bit hard to kind of chase kind of multiple parallel structures or stacked lenses, isn't it?
Yeah, no, with any larger program, I am a very big proponent of putting dollars to work that are moving the needle forward. Ultimately, what we're doing here and the objectives of companies like ourselves should be moving forward towards economics, wrapping scale around things, wrapping definition, de-risking, moving things forward. But in parallel to that, you can't step over some of these opportunities that have the opportunity to provide discovery exposure, torque, and new pounds into the system. And really, it's about then being able to make the decisions that allow you to optimize how you're allocating capital through a development stage.
What do you do when you sort of looking around the market? Sorry to come bounce around between the commercial component, because I know we talked before. You focus on the commercial realities, right, of doing this business. Not all dollars spent out there in the market are spent wisely, and you've got to get that return on that dollar spent. So, with a historic resource of 43 million pounds, there's a kind of easy win, because that would automatically put you on larger resources out there at the moment. Remind people what the kind of strategy is here in terms of this regional exploration, understanding, development, and putting together a resource that people understand, or a resource which kind of sets you in a league of your own. So, because it requires money and it takes time, and if you think the market is, because of all the M&A that's going on, is going to be understanding of that, you're going to have one thought, or if you think actually dollars are expensive at the moment, you come up with another thought. So how do you sort of see the landscape going forward?
Yeah, hey, with what we're executing this year, it's about setting ourselves up and de-risking. Okay, so expansion on the Lac 50 area through continuation, finding that edge, finding that footprint, which from a technical perspective, those are the data points I want to see to de-risk that next round of the investment that moves things forward substantially. At the same time, if we can add additional discoveries into the portfolio in the same project area, etc., what that does is it moves the overall needle, the overall size, scale, and opportunity within the Angilak project further higher and further north. With what we're seeing right now, we would consider it a tier 1 scale opportunity in terms of the opportunity within the Lac 50 region itself. Like, Matt, what is tier 1, right? Like that's a bit of a nebulous comment. I think that, from my perspective, anything in that 80 to 100 million pound range, when you're talking about a uranium mineral resource, at the grades that we're seeing, that 0.5% to 0.7% in that range, that's a tier 1 uranium project by, I think, probably anyone's metric. And then you start to think about the opportunity over and above that, overlaying and laying over new discoveries on top of that. That's where when we say, based off the data that we have in hand currently, based off the layering on of information and the weighting of evidence that we see right now, we like the opportunity for this to be a substantial uranium district.
Right. So, okay, pounds matter. The amount of pounds matter, but so do the type of pounds. So can you just talk about the kind of technical de-risking milestones for you in terms of all those variables that you need to consider? Because, as I say, ultimately, if you're going to take this forward, or someone wants to come in and take this forward, you've got to build the right sorts of pounds on the ground. So, can we look at what those things are, and what would actually trigger a kind of scoping study or an economic study?
Yeah. So any standard development process, you can map that out, right? First stage expansion. In my mind, you de-risk things. You get to a tipping point that you then start delineation drilling. You start building resources. You build up your resources of scale. But that's from my perspective. You're exactly right. They have to meet that threshold kind of bench test, so to speak, from a stress test perspective early on. And the type of mineralization, that mineralized system that we're seeing at LAC 50, it's uranium mineralization hosted in veins, vein hosted uranium mineralization in very competent rock. It comes right to surface, so it's shallow, okay, and it's simple. And that simplicity is good when you're thinking about it from from moving a project forward. So you're dealing with a system that has very technically competent rock mass, which is good. It's high grade mineralization localized in veins, which is good, and it's shallow, which is good. So those are all very compelling technical features that then, when you put together, gives us a high degree of confidence at the right stage to move this thing forward. And this year, right now, it's about de-risking that for that stage and that setup. And it comes at a time in a uranium market. I've said this a number of times. I feel like a broken record. I don't think the macro's ever been better than it is right now, ever. Yet you go back to the 60s, 70s, when you had the initial adoption of civil nuclear reactors across the Western world, and you saw a very steep demand increase curve. We're seeing a more robust curve at this time, and that's not even layering on SMRs or anything else on top of that. And so the absolute reality of where we're sitting right now in the uranium market is that we do not have enough pounds. We do not have enough pounds. We don't have enough pounds at a significant scale to meet demand, and that sets up well for projects and groups like ourselves that are working in uranium systems that have scale potential and that have scale opportunity, because there are very few. You look at uranium maybe as a difference between other commodities, and you go from producers down to a development stage, down to an exploratory resource kind of growth stage of company, and it's very linear. You don't have a solid foundation of projects that are moving up into that next tier. And so that's an opportunity from us from a technical perspective, but it's also an opportunity from a capital markets perspective, because as you're aware, you look at, Cameco is set up to close the week at over $100 Canadian. Fantastic performance. NextGen, et cetera, is moving forward as one of the leaders in the group, performing well. But you get below a certain value within the capital markets, and there are very few names. And so our opportunity, one, as we're advancing the project, is to participate in a real way by looking to capture some of the interest that is rotating down cap within the space, and looking for the next opportunity or the next torquey opportunity within the sector.
Can I ask you one question? I'll come back to that, please. There's one question which I wanted to ask you before we went on to the macro bit, which is around, again, sort of I'm trying to, as a layman, retail person over here, trying to understand how I judge the ability of a company to be successful, and that's around kind of the network. What I know you're not going to start environmental studies or anything anytime soon, but you might want to sort of try and understand what are the recoverables on something like this. What do we know about the kind of host rocks? And we've got high grade, but is it reasonable expectation around recovery on that?
Yeah, it's uraninite and pitchblende. And the flow sheet, as you're aware, likely maybe some of your audience would be aware, the flow sheet in uranium when you're dealing with uraninite and pitchblende is pretty straightforward. I wouldn't call it straightforward. Okay, it's well known. It's
understood.
It's
yes.
well understood. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other important factor And I think this often gets overlooked. And maybe as a sector, there becomes more players into a space and more people that are interested in the commodity, etc. There's a finite number of people in the sector that have had the opportunity to work within the space their careers and do work on tier one and meaningful deposits in the sector. And we're in a good position because we have a very talented team that spans the breadth of not only an exploration team, but development scale focused development stage experience right through to operations and production and commissioning. For myself, I had the good fortune of coming up through Cameco and NextGen, two projects, I was a chief geologist at one of Cameco's operating mines. Helped to lead the development for Lee of the Rook 1 project for a number of years, and have been through a recent development stage in the uranium sector. Cliff Revering, our vice president of exploration, I think I mentioned, he's a guy that I consider one of the most technically competent uranium people that I know, and he was a chief geologist that was at Cameco when they brought Cigar Lake into production and commissioned and ramp up. So the ability for a team to not be learning on the job, so to speak, understand what the next steps are, and optimize and execute on that, I think is an advantage and allows you to really get the most out of an asset.
But I think it's even more basic than that. For us, retail investors kind of looking in on this thing. You say, right, we want companies that can make a discovery, right? We want companies that can actually work out if that discovery can you put a wrap a resource around it, and can you try and sort of wrap some economics around that. And I'm just sort of conscious of the mergers that have gone through recently, Nuclear Fuels and Premier American and Baseload and Forum and Basin Uranium and Nexus, and and a few companies like Standard, etc. Here have become prospect generators for others, because the basic stuff of making discovery is hard, right? And then wrapping the size and the economics around that is the next logical step once you've done that. So that's why I'm sort of honing in on this thing, is to say, like, you're kind of well past stage one, well into stage two. Is that what you sort of, what are you seeing when you look at the marketplace at the moment? All the uranium companies that are out there trying to just kind of stay relevant at the moment, I suspect. Do you expect more M&A? Is that what it's going to take for them to sort of, be relevant? And do you think you've got enough to stay relevant?
Yeah, maybe I'll maybe reserve some comments to us specifically for if that's all right with you. But Matt, why we built ATHA is we understood where the uranium market was going, and we built ATHA to be not only relevant but to be able to participate materially in this uranium cycle that we're at the very early innings of. When you look at the actual supply demand fundamentals and when this thing kicks off in a real way, which I don't believe it even has yet. Okay. And so, the ability to progress a project through a timeline when the market really needs it, that's why we were built. That's why we came to market. That's why a guy like Cliff and others on our team, we go down through our team, why we're able to pull a team like this together, and it's one based off of the assets, but also it's based off of vision, and the objective of not only being material but being a material contributor to this uranium sector as we move forward. So that's the objective of the company.
Right. And it's in terms of kind of trying and kind of like long poles in the tent, or things that you're going to have to try to understand relatively soon. So things like permitting, and all that community relations and so forth is going to be really, really important. I was just talking to someone over in Newfoundland earlier, that they sort of explain the process they've had to go through. So is that something that you're sort of allocating resource to?
Yeah, absolutely. One, I would say building relationships, right? What it comes down to, when you're thinking about projects within Canada, you're operating within the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples across the country generally, right? And it's important to build good relationships and try and maintain good relationships, build off a foundation of trust with the people proximal to the project and the rights holders proximal to the project. That before we even stepped on the ground at Angilak on acquisition, we were having meetings before we turned to drill, before we stepped onto the project. We also have an agreement in place with NTI, which is an umbrella organization within Nunavut. And then, it's the right thing to do. It's critically important to move a project forward, but it's also fundamentally, in my view, the right thing to do. Now, from a regulatory perspective, Nunavut's a very good jurisdiction. There's been a number of mines built in Nunavut over the last number of years, and then you go down and you drill in specifically on the uranium side. And in Canada, uranium is regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They're the life cycle regulator. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're in Saskatchewan or if you're in Nunavut or if you're in Labrador. That is the process within Canada. It's very well known. There is a tremendous amount of expertise that resides within the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They're a regulator that has the best record across any mining industry within a sector. It's a process that you have to know and understand. The technical side's one thing, but the regulatory side's another thing. And again, within our skill set and our ability within our company, understanding not only a technical path forward, but also a regulatory and a path forward is equally as important.
Well, like I said, this might be a short, quick catch up, but I was fascinated by the kind of the process that you guys are going through. Because I think what you're talking sort of made me think about. We talked about your Pathfinder analysis and vectoring in on sort of higher grade. Obviously, it seems to be working. Have you kind of updated or refined that thinking any?
Yeah, you learn everything. You learn a lot from every drill hole that you drill. And but I'll just I think this might get sometimes gets a bit lost. Uranium is a difficult commodity to explore and discover. It is, and I go back to the work that started off when we first acquired the project. The reason we acquired the project, we've got LAC 50 sitting right at the edge of a basin, a fundamental thesis, okay? A lot of uranium outside of the edge of the basin, sitting right at the edge of a basin. How can we, what can we do? What data can we acquire? And what process can we go through to better understand the potential under this basin? We did that over the course of a year. And the technical team in my opinion, did a fantastic job of building up high probability, high priority targets. And then on the first hole, intersecting mineralization, extremely uncommon. Extremely uncommon. And hey, that speaks to two things, okay? In my opinion, it speaks to two things. It speaks to one, the work that you can do when you have a team and the ability to, have a disciplined technical approach and de-risk targets. But two, let's not kid ourselves. There's a degree of luck in everything that you do. And I wouldn't call it luck, but I'd call it probability. Okay, the probability of intersecting mineralization in the first drill hole into a 31-kilometer long trend is very, very low, unless it's a trend that has a very high metal endowment. It seems like a very simple statement, but you drill a hole, you hit mineralization on your first pass in the first hole. It's an indication to me that we need to be very persistent in this area because there's likely a significant amount of uranium in the area.
We shall see.
Yeah.
We shall see. Only the drill bit will tell us. Well, Troy, I appreciate your time, and it's the end of the week, etc. So I'm going to let you go. Appreciate that. When have you got how much more drilling is happening at the moment? When will we see?
Yeah, important point. That's the first two holes out of a 10,000 meter program. Okay, so expect a significantly more news to come over the course of the summer as we continue, one, to build out within the LAC 50 area, and two, follow up on newly discovered mineralization. So it's setting up to be an exciting year, exciting summer, especially when you consider the context of what's going on the macro space and the directionality. We feel the very strong directionality to the upside with on the uranium spot price. So yeah, it's thanks for having us, and we'll keep you up to date as we continue to progress.